One of the more niche and very interesting chapters of the Great War was the German expedition to Afghanistan called the Niedermeyer-Hentig Expedition, which lasted from 1915 to 1916. During the expedition, the Germans met with Emir Habibullah Khan, the Emir's very sympathetic son, Amanullah Khan, the Emir's brother, Prime Minister Nasrullah Khan, and other high-level government officials in Afghanistan to try to convince them to join the war. Check out my 12-minute military history video I made on the expedition for more context. Basically, Afghanistan was in the economic pocket of the British, and Habibullah Khan became paranoid at the German presence as he thought that a German clock gift was a bomb to blow him up, and that he also thought the Germans and other government opportunists were going to kill him. Habibullah was also considered the master of inactivity in diplomacy, as he wanted to wait for a clear winner to emerge in the war and fended off pressure from hawks in Afghanistan and the Germans to declare war on the Entente. But in this alternate timeline, Afghanistan decides to declare war on Britain and Russia. How did this happen? Well, either Habibullah Khan isn't paranoid or is bolder against the British, as the population was more pro-German in Afghanistan. Another change that could have been made is if Amanullah or Nasrullah Khan decided to seize power from Habibullah Khan, but that could have negative and unforeseen backlash within Afghanistan. Both scenarios here would get Afghanistan into the war, but they would go completely differently. But the main point is that Afghanistan joins the Central Powers in the war in 1916, and I will be just going over if Afghanistan joins the war, and I'm going to neglect who is running Afghanistan because I don't want to dive this video into the politics of Afghanistan and to make it a two-parter with mostly the same results. So, Afghanistan joins the war in 1916 and opens another front for the British and Russians to fight against and divert forces from the Eastern Front and Middle Eastern theater of the war. The Germans and Ottomans would be unable to send troops and equipment into Afghanistan because the route through Persia became hostile to the Germans and Ottomans in 1916 with the start of the Arab Revolt. So immediately we have broken promises to the Emir by the Germans and Ottomans. The British and Indian forces invade Afghanistan, and the war in Afghanistan would be quite similar to the Third Anglo-Afghan War that had occurred in our timeline, except it's taking place in 1916 and lasts until 1917 instead of being in 1919. The key difference here is that World War I is still going on. That's kind of obvious. There's no doubt that the British and Russians would be able to suppress the Afghans and prevent an invasion of India. However, this comes at a great cost on other fronts of the war. The Afghanistan front is a diversion from the Middle Eastern theater for the British, which allows the Ottoman Empire to remain in a better state, but only temporarily. There's possibly a one-year setback in the Middle East specifically for the Mesopotamian campaign, but the Ottomans would still lose as the empire was on its last legs in World War I. The Ottoman Empire just stood no chance against the British and Arabs in the Middle East. Russia, meanwhile, suffers more losses to the Germans and Austro-Hungarians for a slightly sooner peace deal and Russian Revolution. I know in this video it seems like not a lot changes in the grand scheme of things in this alternate scenario where Afghanistan joins the Central Powers, but that's just my interpretation. Afghanistan is ill-equipped to wage war against the British and Russians who would invade the country, while Germany and the Ottomans can't send troops and weapons to support the Afghans. Basically, it's as if the Third Anglo-Afghan War occurred in 1916 instead of 1919. The British would militarily defeat the Afghans and recognize Afghanistan as an independent state earlier to keep up their war with the Central Powers and to make up for lost time in the Mesopotamia campaign. However, one possible major change that could come is that the Arab Revolt becomes even more prominent in fighting against the Ottomans in World War I with British Indian forces tied up in Afghanistan. This could result in British support for the Kingdom of Hejaz against the House of Saud during the post-war conquest of the Arabian Peninsula, and the Persian Gulf becomes dominated by the Hashemites. Since this part of the scenario is more speculation into uncharted territory and I can't really predict what would happen, I'll leave it here. But some key takeaways from this scenario is that it's possible that the Arabian Peninsula is dominated by the Hashemites, and the Hashemite monarchy controls Jordan, modern-day Saudi Arabia, which doesn't rise up, and Iraq possibly remains a Hashemite kingdom further into the 1950s and possibly into the 1960s, as I have no idea how this would impact the rest of the Arab world going into the Cold War and World War II, as well as other areas. But what do you think would have happened had Afghanistan joined the Central Powers in World War I? Write in the comments below, and thank you for watching.